This is Common Sense Generation. Common Sense Generation. Good day, everyone. You're watching Common Sense Generation. I'm Kądzielska-Koper, and today we talk about Europe, European cities, and civility. With me is a great intellectual from Hungary, Professor Ferenc Hörcher. Thank you very much for showing up here.
Hello, and I'm happy to be here.
Professor, it is a huge pleasure for me to talk with you. You represent the intellectual thoughts of this part of Europe, and this is a also unique voice saying that we have here in Eastern and Central Europe, we have our traditions, we have our independent thoughts and analysis, and one of your approach is the uniqueness of European cities. This is a topic which you dedicated a book about. So tell us, what is so unique about European city?
Thank you again for being here, and thanks for the question, because it concerns one of my favorite topics, so I'm very happy to talk about it. Yes, I published this book in 2021 with the title The Political Philosophy of the European City. And it tried to distinguish the distinctive heritage of the European city. And I relied, of course, on earlier authorities, among which one can mention Max Weber, who in his recovery of the European capitalist tradition talks about the European city as a specific arrangement. A specific arrangement because it has got different traditions that were brought together. First, the military tradition. The city is always close to a castle where people could defend themselves against their enemies. So in that sense, the military tradition is crucial. Then
I'll stop you here, but I make just a comment to another interview on Common Sense Generation. I had the pleasure to talk with an American writer approaching in Europe, and I've asked him about the mental differences about America and Europe, and he said that whenever you enter a European city, you actually see a castle. It is an old castle, and this just the presence of the past generation, which is very often somewhere above you on a hill, and that you realize that there were people here before, and they have their way of life, and they have their the way of fortifications and everything. And when you live in US, the only castles are actually Disney castles, or
very different ones.
Very different. Just realizing that the background of your ancestors.
That's right, and that's a very important difference. The second tradition which comes into creating the specific European city is the religious tradition. For example, take Hungary. Our first king, Saint Stephen I, what he did was to create a network of church establishments, and in this way creating the counties, in fact, which became the historical counties of Hungary. So the religious element is crucial. The city in the European tradition is a religious settlement, and that's of course expressed in the church in your city, which is again usually very old, historical in its style, and also very high building like the castle. So that's the second element.
So we have whenever we approach any European city, we also have this at least some thought of presence of God.
Indeed.
And the fact that our ancestors cultivated Christianity, they very often put so much effort to create those cathedrals, big churches, which in those times took centuries, 100 years to build, or even more. So few generations who were putting this so much effort to have this beautiful place. So even if we are not religious, but if we are people of common sense, then we respect this effort.
Yes, indeed, I fully agree with that description, because it makes it relevant for the city, that it has got that divine background. It's the saints of the city that will take care of its fate or its grace. And the third element is the element of commerce. Our cities are usually at the side of a main road, or at a riverside, or at a seaport. And that is because that's where the merchants passed and came together at the market day and sold their products there. So that's why we always find a marketplace in a city where the commercial activity took place. And all of that, the military, the religious, and the commercial, came together in what might be called the civitas, which is the political community of the city. And that civitas, which built the architectural environment for itself, the walls around the city, and the marketplace with the church, as well as the town hall, and the main roads from and back, the gates of the city, which is in accordance with the Roman tradition, actually. So here we have to keep in mind that the ancient European tradition of the Roman Empire is also present in much of the European cities. So
a funny thing, but it is this presence of a previous civilization, which we take a lot of from, but a previous way of life which passed into the history, because we don't live in the Romans survive until today. We don't speak Latin anymore, and we don't live in a way of life as they did. Their gods are dead, but they are still alive in a way that they are present somewhere, either in Rome. We see, of course, a lot of this, but not only in Croatia, in
Hungary, in Germany, even
Spain.
Even in England.
In England, with the Hadrian Wall, then you realize that there was a previous way of life again here in the same land, and then we come from somewhere. So when we realize and we cherish the past, then we of course can somehow look in the future.
Indeed. So this European experience of a community of citizens living together in this place that we described so far is specific in the sense that it is self-regulating and autonomous. That's the basic idea, and it comes from the Greek polis, and our word politics and political comes from the Greek experience. And the idea of citizenship and civic virtues comes from the Roman experience of the civitas. And those 2 points are also plus there is a third dimension to it, which is the tradition of Jerusalem and the religiously ordered city of the Jews. So those 3 experiences are always behind the European concept. But the basic thing here is self-regulation, to giving rule for yourself, which is autarkia, which is the major idea, which is the incubator of democracy, of our present way of representative democracy. Goes back in those days when there was a general assembly of the citizens, but also the council, which represented that General Assembly for ordinary working days when people had to work, but the council took care and took political responsibility for the whole. So in that sense, the European city expresses the European state as we learn it in our everyday life, living in a parliamentary democracy here in Europe.
This is a wonderful remark to say that the structure of the city, the architecture, what it's inside, it represents the values, the system, the political system, and the social order, and those three components, which very often are called the three pillars of the Western civilization. So as you mentioned, the Roman law, which is present there, even if the fact that we have a council, we have a civic council there, the Judeo-Christianity tradition, which, as you mentioned, is represented by this big church or cathedral, and the Greek philosophy, yes, which is in the Civitas. And this brings us to your another book, which I know you're working in, and this is the Civility.
Yes, indeed, because as we described it so far, we have got Urbs, which is the architectural assembly, which presents the environment for the community, and the community itself, the civitas, the political community living together. And now my question is, what is the distinguishing mark of a citizen? And the claim is that the distinguishing mark of the citizen is civility. And civility means two things. One is political, the other one is social. Politically, the citizen is civil in the sense that he or she partakes in the affairs of the community. So he or she is responsible for the common good, for the res publica. So in this sense, all of us as citizens of our local community, as citizens of our state, and even as citizens of Europe by now, we are responsible for our communities. That's one part of civility, the political part. But there is an equally important part, and here we come back to this duality of politics and social life, which is distinguished in the German tradition, like Hegel distinguishing the civil society and the state. So we talked about politics, but what about social life? Social life is reflected in the individual's life in his or her manners, i.e. The ordinary human behavior, the habits and customs that characterizes us. A civil person, a person of the civil virtues, is a person who is polite, courteous, and behaving with a certain nobility, with a certain dignitas, a concept which goes back again to the Romans, but which has a special significance by now in the Christian tradition, because human dignity is a Christian concept worked out during the centuries of Christian thought, but becoming exceptionally important in the 20th century, when the totalitarian regimes had a practice of inhuman rule. And that means that we had to recreate the special way of ruling, which is human. And the concept of dignity describes that special feature that needs to be honored by any government. That's the idea of the Human Rights Manifesto and Declaration, i.e. the concept that we, as created by God, are the images of God. So whenever a human being is dealt with in an inhuman manner, that's sacrilege. That's something against our basic nature, which is created nature, created by God. But by now...
This is Common Sense Generation. If you like this channel, Please subscribe, share, and comment. Your voice really matters.
This also has a political ends of it. Very strong one is that there is the limit of power. That even if absolute political power cannot cross a certain line of a dignity of human being. We of course know that that all totalitarian systems are trying to violate it in every form. But this is of course the goal of a civic society, not to let any political power to cross this line, whatever is the reason.
Yes, that's the political dimension. We are responsible for our governments. We cannot point to external circumstances, but because it's our government, so it represents us, and therefore we have to be responsible in our elections. But the civil point is that given this dignity of the human being, we are expected to behave in a humane manner. So the dignitas is expressed in certain ways of behavior, in certain way of dealing with the other, in certain manners, habits, and morals. That's an element that democracy for some time tried to forget about, because the claim was that these noble manners belonged to a feudal age, which we have to forget, because that was this
heritage of the aristocracy.
That's right, and in that sense unjust, because there was no equality among the people. And the argument I make is that civility does not need a hierarchical understanding of interpersonal relationships, but it is dependent on our self-perceptions as a man of a created nature, and as such having a certain dignity which no one can take away from us, but which demands certain things from us. We need to behave in a dignified manner.
So it is something our right in a way, but also our responsibility.
Indeed.
That we ourselves don't cross this way of behaving.
Yes.
A beautiful concept, and I think very important to remember in all situations, but especially politics, especially when this political debate becomes so severe and so so strong that we
violent,
often, where we almost don't see in our political opponents human beings, but we start to see those rivals in this matter to be destroyed. But this comes civitas saying that we after all belong to one state. But there's of course a stronger anthropological assumption in it that as you said, that we have this image of God, and if we violate it in the other human being, then of course we violate it in ourselves.
That's right. So it's our self-esteem that requires us to behave in a dignified and civilized way, and in this case, civility and civilization is also connected to culture, because the human being is able not only to survive and preserve the small heritage of his or her, but we are able to create things for others, and that's culture. In culture, we are able to express our specific contribution to the community, and in that sense we are able to pass over our human nature, which is of course by its nature imperfect. And in the work of art we create something which is perfect in a very specific sense, in an aesthetic way. And that way, culture becomes a part of our everyday behavior, our ordinary manners. And in the bourgeois tradition, in the tradition of citizenship, culture becomes a distinguishing mark. That's where the German concept of Bildungsbürgertum becomes crucial, which describes a citizenry which is defined by its culture. It's not its wealth, which is the Besitzbürgertum, the citizens who have got property, but there is a level beyond that, and that's Bildungsbürgertum, the citizenry which is characterized by its culture.
And this culture which is passed also to another generation.
Yes, that's very important, that education is crucial, because we have to be initiated into this culture. Culture is not something that is given by nature. It's natural that we create culture, but culture is by definition something that beyond nature. It's artificial in that sense. And so we need to be initiated into it. We need education. And education is nothing else but transferring the culture of the earlier generations to the new generation.
I've heard of this expression that education or upbringing, especially, for example, in philosophy, is to create the upbringing to humans, to human being, in this way that that of course we are all born humans, but it lifts us up in a way that we can achieve something more, and we become part of this huge heritage, but also society, as you mentioned, through the education, through appreciations and learning of what was created in the past. And of course, this we can also recreate it, change it, and add something for the future. So without this element of education, and with also with appreciation what was before us, then very often we cannot realize the fact that we, of course, are standing on this shoulder of the giant.
Yes. Our education will not be full without that. I fully agree with that, and let me try to explain where this idea comes from. I think that it goes back to, again, the Greeks, the idea of paideia, which was the Greek idea of education, which meant that it was not simply, information transfer that was taking place in the gymnasiums of the ancient Greek cities, but what was happening was, in fact, character formation. In other words, what you learned was not simply data. It was not simply just positive knowledge in the sense of positivism. But what you were initiated into was the special routines, the special ways of life of your community, and the way of life that was successful for generations, and therefore a way of life which was natural for human beings, and which let them become to get closer and closer to perfection. And the way to approach that is to initiate into the virtues, into the social and moral virtues beyond the intellectual virtues. And that's where the Christian tradition is continuous with the ancient tradition.
And paideia was so very much based on learning by heart the great novels, or great two books of the ancient times. So of course the Homer, the Homer great Odyssey and the epics, exactly. And those students, or those young people, as I remember, they were learning it by heart, because in those times they trusted. People trusted more the spoken language than the written one, and in order to not this epopee not to be forgotten, you needed to to learn it by heart and to repeat it all the time. And by repeating it, you didn't only repeat the story, but you repeat the image of the virtue which was presented by every single character. So Achille was the virtue of courage, and Odious,
prudence, or phronesis. Indeed, that's what I wanted to arrive to. That there is this tradition of the cardinal virtues in the Christian context, which goes back to the ancients. The four cardinal virtues of our morality. You mentioned, of course, courage, but justice, prudence, and moderations are all of them are crucial for a thriving, flourishing community, and that you can learn through narratives. So the ancients listened to Homer's poems, epic poems, but they also went to the theater, where they listened to the stories of the drama. The dramatic narratives of the city-states, but and they were also listening to music, because music again helps character formation. So all these practices, and they practice it. They don't just they were not simply passive audiences, but they acted together, so to say, in order to learn it by practice, as you mentioned, by heart. And this way, the character changed. It was not simply pleasure that they achieved or got from these experiences, but character formation and initiation into virtuous habits.
Exactly. So just to finish this interview, the punchline is also that the narrative is showing us those virtues which we can live through those characters and learn our civic way of life. And I would add the common sense as an element of it, and also of this beautiful conservative tradition.
Yes, of course, common sense is closely connected both to prudence, practical wisdom, the virtue that we need to decide well in our daily life, but also to taste. And there we come back to culture. So morality and politics, the realm of practical wisdom, and beauty, which is chosen by our taste. These are coming together in that tradition. So I agree with you that this is the tradition of the European citizen, the lesson that we learned from our grandparents, and we should take care of that.
And that's why beauty matters. This was Professor Ferenc Hörcher in Common Sense Generation. I do hope you appreciate it and you liked it. Write a comment under this interview, and thank you for watching it. And again, I thank Polish National Foundation for making this video podcast possible.
This is Common Sense Generation. Common Sense Generation.